The Galactic Council chamber was silent as Ambassador Vexther stood before the gathered representatives of 300 alien species. His 4 eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he prepared to deliver what he believed would be the final word on the human problem. The chamber itself was enormous, with crystalline walls that reflected the faces of delegates who had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years without challenge. Now, they faced a young species that had barely left their home planet a century ago, yet somehow disturbed the careful peace that had lasted longer than human civilization itself. Daniel Carter sat in the human delegation seat and watched Vexther with tired eyes. He was 58 years old and had spent the last 3 weeks trying to find common ground between his people and the council. Every proposal he made was rejected, and every compromise he offered was dismissed. The aliens saw humanity as children who needed discipline, and Daniel was exhausted from trying to explain that his species did not respond well to demands backed by threats. His aide Sophie Morgan sat beside him with her hands clenched tight beneath the table. She had reviewed the terms the council was about to present and knew they were not terms at all, but commands for total surrender. Vexther raised his clawed hand, and the chamber fell completely silent. The acoustics in the room were perfect, so every word would carry to every delegate, no matter how they heard or sensed communication. He spoke in the common tongue that all council species used for official business, and his voice was cold with certainty. The human delegation has 72 standard hours to accept our terms. You will surrender control of your military fleet to council oversight. You will dismantle your shipyards and weapons production facilities. You will allow council monitors to oversee your government and ensure compliance with galactic law. You will limit your population growth to sustainable levels as determined by council experts. You will restrict your expansion to the 3 systems you currently occupy and seek permission before colonizing any additional worlds. The terms continued for several minutes, and each one stripped away another piece of human independence. Sophie felt her anger rising but kept her face neutral. She had been trained as a diplomat and knew that showing emotion now would only make things worse. Daniel sat perfectly still and listened to every word. When Vexther finally finished, he looked down at the human ambassador with what might have been pity or contempt, depending on how one interpreted alien expressions. Daniel stood slowly and buttoned his jacket. He had been a lawyer before becoming a diplomat and knew how to control a room, even when that room was filled with beings who could crush humanity without effort. He spoke clearly, and his voice carried the same authority that won him cases in courtrooms back on Earth. Honored members of the Galactic Council, I have listened to your terms, and I understand what you are demanding, but I must ask you to understand what you are actually requesting. You are not asking us to join your community as equals. You are not asking us to cooperate in maintaining peace. You are demanding that we surrender everything that makes us who we are. Several delegates shifted in their seats, and Daniel could see that some were uncomfortable but not uncomfortable enough to object. Chancellor Wormus, who led the council, raised one clawed hand in a gesture that meant continue but carefully. Daniel took a breath and went on. My species has existed for hundreds of thousands of years. We have survived ice ages and plagues and wars that nearly destroyed us. We have climbed out of caves and learned to split atoms and reached for the stars because we refuse to accept that our circumstances defined our limits. Now you tell us that all of that struggle and all of that achievement means nothing because you have decided we are too dangerous to be trusted, Ambassador. Salon of the Viridians hissed from her platform. Your species weaponizes everything you touch. Your entertainment glorifies violence. Your history is written in blood. We have reviewed your records, and we see a species that has never known true peace. The Council has maintained harmony across the galaxy for 10,000 years, and we will not allow one aggressive species to threaten that. Harmony. Daniel turned to face her directly. You speak of harmony, but I wonder if your people remember what they once were. The Viridians were warriors before the Council pacified them. You had martial traditions that stretched back millennia, and now they are barely remembered. The Council did not bring you peace. They brought you forgetfulness. They made you forget who you were so completely that you cannot imagine being anything else. The chamber erupted in angry voices. and several delegates demanded that Daniel be removed for insulting a council member. Chancellor Warmus called for order, and the noise slowly died down. He looked at Daniel with ancient eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall. "Ambassador Carter, you are not helping your case. The council has voted, and the decision is final. Your species will accept our terms or face the consequences." Daniel felt Sophie tense beside him, but he kept his voice calm. "What consequences? Will you invade our worlds? Will you bombard our cities? Will you exterminate us because we refuse to kneel? I thought the council stood for peace and civilization. Is this how you maintain your harmony, by threatening extinction for anyone who disagrees with you?" Vexler stepped forward, and his large frame cast a shadow across the human delegation. "We have assembled a fleet at the edge of your space. 7,000 ships, representing the combined military might of 100 species. If you do not comply, they will enter your system and enforce the council's will. Your primitive vessels will be destroyed. Your orbital stations will be occupied. Your people will learn obedience whether they choose to or not. This is not a negotiation. This is your final warning." Daniel looked at the alien for a long moment and then gathered his materials. Sophie stood with him, and they walked toward the exit. The delegates watched them go, and some seemed satisfied while others looked troubled. At the door, Daniel stopped and turned back. He spoke one more time, and his voice carried across the entire chamber. "You have given us 72 hours. We will use that time to consult with our government. But I want you to understand something. Humanity did not survive everything our world threw at us by surrendering when things got hard. We survived by fighting, by adapting, by refusing to give up no matter how bad things looked. You think your fleet frightens us? You think your numbers will overwhelm us? But you have no idea what humans are capable of when you threaten everything we hold dear." The transmission ended, and Daniel and Sophie walked through the curved corridors toward their ship. Neither spoke until they were alone in the shuttle that would take them back to the human diplomatic vessel. Sophie finally broke the silence. "Sir, what do we do now?" "They are going to attack. 7,000 ships against our few hundred. We cannot win this fight." Daniel stared out the viewport at the stars. "We go home. We tell our people what happened here, and we let them decide if freedom is worth fighting for. But I already know what they will say. Humans do not bow. We never have, and we never will." Back on Earth, the news spread quickly. President Helen Brooks convened an emergency meeting of the Planetary Defense Council in the secure bunker beneath Geneva. Military commanders and scientists and advisors filled the room, and every face showed the strain of what they were hearing. Admiral Jack Preston pulled up displays showing human military strength compared to the Council fleet, and the numbers were not encouraging. "We have 43 capital ships and maybe 800 smaller vessels total. The Council is bringing 7,000. Even if we fight perfectly, we will be overwhelmed." General Marcus Webb nodded grimly. "Our simulations show we can hurt them, but we cannot win a straight fight. If we want to survive this, we need to think differently." Dr. Lisa Hayes stood and activated another set of displays. These showed projects that had been hidden from the Council since first contact. Weapons that violated every treaty humanity had signed. Ships built in secret. Technologies that pushed the boundaries of what the galaxy thought possible. She spoke carefully, knowing that what she was about to propose would change everything. "Madam President, we have been preparing for this possibility for 20 years. We knew the Council would eventually try to control us. We built contingencies. If we use them, we can fight back. We can make them pay for every inch of space. But once we start down this path, there is no going back, Helen." Brooks looked around the room and saw the same determination in every face. They had not asked for this fight, but they would not run from it either. She thought of her daughter and grandson, and all the children who deserved to grow up free. She thought of everything humanity had accomplished, and everything they might still achieve if they were allowed to chart their own course. Then she stood, and her voice was steel. "We did not choose this war, but we will fight it. Activate every contingency. Bring every weapon online. And send a message to our people. Tell them what is coming. Tell them we are going to fight. Tell them that freedom is worth any price. Across Earth, the message went out, and millions responded. Volunteers flooded recruitment centers. Factories shifted to wartime production. Scientists worked around the clock on weapons that had been theoretical until now. And in hidden facilities, CA. Turred across the solar system, ancient protocols were activated, and systems that had waited decades for this moment came to life. The Galactic Council had given humanity 72 hours to surrender. Humanity was going to spend every second of that time preparing to show the galaxy what happens when you threaten a species that has never learned how to quit. The countdown showed 58 hours remaining when Dr. Lisa Hayes stepped into the restricted zone of the Lunar Research Facility. The base was carved deep into the dark side of the moon, where no Council observer could ever see it, and no scanning technology could penetrate the layers of rock and shielding that protected its secrets. She had designed much of this place herself over the past 15 years, and knew every corridor and every lab and every weapon system hidden within. The security AI recognized her instantly, and the massive blast doors opened with a hiss of compressed air. "Welcome, Dr. Hayes. All systems are standing by for activation protocols, Commander Kyle." Jensen met her at the entrance, and his Marine uniform showed the wear of someone who had been awake for 30 hours straight. His eyes were clear, though, and focused with the intensity of a man who knew his moment had finally arrived. "Doctor, the Joint Chiefs have approved full activation. We are bringing everything online. Every weapon, every ship, every system we have built for this day." Lisa walked beside him through corridors lined with sealed containers, and each one held something that would horrify the Galactic Council if they knew it existed. The chamber opened before them, like a cathedral dedicated to the science of war. And Lisa felt a moment of sadness that humanity had needed to build such a place. But she pushed the feeling aside because regret was a luxury they could not afford. "Show me the status of Project Phantom." Kyle pulled up holographic displays that filled the air between them. 37 stealth ships fully operational. 0 signature drives, tested and ready. Each vessel is invisible to every scanning technology the Council uses. They have been positioning themselves in the outer system for the past week, and the Council fleet has no idea. They are there. Lisa nodded and moved to another console. "What about Project Hellfire?" Kyle's expression darkened slightly. "Antimatter warheads are loaded and armed. Yields exceed anything the Council has used in 2,000 years. Each warhead can take out a capital ship with a single hit. We have enough to destroy their entire fleet 3 times over, but we will not need that many." The words hung in the air. Both of them understood what they were really discussing. These were not just weapons, but the potential to commit genocide on a scale the galaxy had not seen in millennia. Lisa had insisted on fail-safes and limitations built into every system because she refused to let humanity become the monsters the Council claimed they were. "We use minimum necessary force. We disable rather than destroy. We show them we can win without becoming butchers." Kyle agreed completely. That is why Project Silence is so important. Once we activate the quantum communication disruptors, the entire Council fleet will be blind and deaf. They will not be able to coordinate or communicate or even know where their own ships are. We will have total information superiority while they stumble around in the dark. "Captain Ryan." Foster approached from the weapons development section, and his young face showed the exhaustion of endless preparation. "Dr. Hayes, the nanite swarms are ready for deployment. 12 clusters with 10 billion units each. They are programmed to target ship systems only and will leave life support functional. Crew casualties should be minimal." Lisa felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. The nanites had been her personal project, and she had spent years perfecting their programming. They would eat through armor and disable weapons and shut down engines, but they would not harm living beings. After 96 hours, they would dissolve into harmless compounds and leave no permanent damage. It was warfare with mercy built into the very fabric of the weapon. "Excellent work, Captain. Make sure every cluster commander understands the rules of engagement. We are not here to kill. We are here to win." Across the solar system, other facilities were coming to life with the same deadly purpose. On Mars, Colonel Amy Peterson supervised the activation of 300 railgun batteries that had been hidden beneath the red soil for a decade. Each cannon could accelerate tungsten rods to 20% of light speed and turn simple metal into weapons that hit with the force of nuclear bombs. Her team worked with practiced efficiency, and every targeting solution was calculated and recalculated to ensure maximum effectiveness. The Council fleet would approach expecting an easy victory, and instead, they would fly into a kill zone that stretched across millions of kilometers. Colonel Peterson studied the tactical displays and watched as the Council ships gathered at the edge of the solar system. They were arranging themselves in standard battle formation, with the largest vessels at the center and smaller ships forming protective screens around them. It was a formation designed to intimidate and overwhelm through sheer numbers, and it had probably worked for thousands of years against species who had never learned modern warfare. But humanity had studied war the way other species studied art or philosophy, and they knew how to turn strength into weakness. Let them come in close. Let them think they have us surrounded. Then we show them what a real ambush looks like. In Earth orbit, Captain Nicole Grant commanded the destroyer, Valiant, and ran final checks on systems that represented the cutting edge of human technology. Her ship and 50 others like it had been built in secret, using techniques that improved on everything humanity had learned from captured alien technology. The fold space generators alone gave them an advantage that the Council could not match, because human ships could jump across the system in 3 seconds while Council vessels needed 10 minutes to charge their drives. Speed and surprise would be their greatest weapons, and Nicole intended to use both without mercy. Her tactical officer, Lieutenant Jake Morrison, reported that all systems showed green across the board. Captain, we are ready for combat operations. The crew is at battle stations, and every weapon is armed and targeted. We can begin attack runs the moment the order comes. Nicole allowed herself a thin smile. The Valiant was her first command, and she had dreamed of exploring the galaxy and making peaceful contact with alien civilizations. Instead, she was preparing to fight a war that would determine whether humanity survived as a free species or became subjects of an empire that valued control over everything else. The irony was not lost on her, but she had made her peace with it. Sometimes you had to fight for the chance to be peaceful. Make sure all pilots understand the mission parameters. We hit hard and fast, and then we disappear. They should never see us coming and never know where we went. Back on Earth, President Helen Brooks stood in the Strategic Command Center and watched feeds from across the solar system. Every screen showed some aspect of the vast military machine that humanity had built in secret, and she felt the weight of command pressing down on her like a physical force. Admiral Jack Preston stood beside her, and his weathered face showed both pride and concern. Madam President, we have confirmed all assets are in position. When the deadline expires, we will be ready to execute the battle plan. But I need to ask one more time. Are you certain this is what we want to do? Once we start this, there is no going back. Helen turned to face him directly. Jack, I have spent the last 3 days trying to find another option. I have consulted with every advisor and every expert and every leader who might have a better idea. But the Council will not negotiate. They will not compromise. They have decided that humanity must submit, and they are willing to use overwhelming force to make us obey. So yes, I am certain. We fight because the alternative is to live on our knees, and that is something humans have never accepted and never will. Admiral Preston nodded slowly. Then we fight. And we make sure they understand that taking Earth will cost them more than they ever imagined paying. Dr. Hayes appeared on screen from the lunar facility, and her expression was calm despite the magnitude of what she was reporting. Madam President, all weapon systems are operational and ready. We have approximately 36 hours until the deadline, and we will use every minute to refine our targeting and prepare our forces. The Council thinks they know what we are capable of, but they have only seen what we allowed them to see. They are going to learn that humans are very good at keeping secrets. General Marcus Webb added his own report from Marine Command. Ground forces are ready to deploy if needed. Every major city has evacuation protocols. Activated and shelters can hold 40% of the population, if the Council attempts orbital bombardment. It is not enough, but it is the best we could do without revealing our preparations. Helen closed her eyes for just a moment and thought about her grandson, playing in Seattle and her daughter teaching school, and all the ordinary people who had no idea their lives hung in the balance. She thought about the billions of humans across Earth and Mars and the outer colonies, who were about to face a war they had not asked for and did not deserve. But she also thought about the alternative and knew that some things were worth any price. Send the order. All units are weapons-free the moment the deadline expires. We do not fire first, but we will fire last, and we will show the galaxy that humanity cannot be caged. Sophie Morgan stood in the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel and stared out at the stars. She was thinking about all the conversations she had with alien diplomats over the past 3 years and wondering if any of them had ever really understood what made humans different. They saw violence and aggression, and they assumed that meant humanity was primitive or dangerous. But they never understood that those same traits came from a world that tried to kill humans in 1,000 different ways, and that surviving such a world required a combination of cooperation and ruthlessness that the Council had forgotten was possible. Now they would learn. Now they would see what happened when you pushed survivors into a corner and demanded they surrender. Daniel Carter sat alone in his quarters and wrote messages to his daughter Kate and his grandson. Just in case he did not survive what was coming, he told them he loved them, and he was proud of them, and he hoped they would understand why he had chosen to stand rather than kneel. Then he sealed the messages and set them to be delivered only if he was confirmed dead. After that, there was nothing to do but wait and prepare, and trust that the forces being assembled across the solar system would be enough to protect everything that mattered. The countdown continued, and with every passing our humanity grew more ready and more determined. They had not wanted this war, but they would fight it with everything they had. And when the deadline expired, the galaxy would learn that some species valued freedom more than survival, and that those species were the most dangerous opponents of all. 18 hours remained on the Council's ultimatum when the diplomatic channels opened one final time. The Galactic Council had decided to make one last gesture of what they called mercy and allow Ambassador Daniel Carter to address the assembly. Chancellor Wormus sat on his elevated platform and looked down at the human delegation with the expression of someone who had already won but was willing to be gracious about it. Ambassador Carter, you may speak. We hope you bring news of your species' acceptance of our terms. Daniel stood in the center of the chamber, and his holographic image appeared before the 300 assembled species. He had not slept in 36 hours, and his face showed the strain, but his voice was steady and clear. Honored members of the Galactic Council, I stand before you not to accept your terms, but to help you understand what you are really asking. You believe you are maintaining peace and protecting the galaxy from a dangerous species, but what you are actually doing is trying to destroy everything that makes humanity what we are. Several council members shifted uncomfortably, but most maintained expressions of indifference or contempt. Daniel continued, without waiting for permission. 300,000 years ago, my ancestors lived in caves and hunted with stone tools. We should have gone extinct a dozen times over. The climate changed, and the predators were faster and stronger, and the diseases killed us by the thousands. But we survived. Not because we were the biggest or the strongest, but because we refused to give up. We learned to work together. We learned to innovate. We learned to adapt to conditions that should have killed us. Ambassador Vexter clicked his mandibles in what might have been laughter. A touching story, Ambassador, but irrelevant to the current situation. Your history of survival does not give you the right to threaten galactic peace. Daniel turned to face the Krellin directly. I am not threatening anyone. I am trying to explain what you are demanding when you tell us to surrender our freedom. You are asking us to give up the one thing that defines what it means to be human. The ability to choose our own path. The right to make our own mistakes. The freedom to live as we see fit without anyone's permission. Chancellor Wormus raised one clawed hand. Ambassador, your species has existed in space for barely a century. The Council has maintained peace for 10,000 years. Surely you can see that our experience justifies our oversight of younger species, who do not yet understand the responsibilities that come with advanced technology. Daniel felt his patience wearing thin. Your peace came at a price. The Viridians were warriors, and now they barely remember what that means. The Kelthani had a rich military tradition, and now it is gone. The Trelawnec chose submission over extinction, but they lost their identity in the process. Every species that joins the Council becomes a pale shadow of what they were. You do not bring peace, Chancellor. You bring conformity enforced at gunpoint. The chamber erupted in angry voices, and several delegates demanded that Daniel be silenced for insulting the Council. Ambassador Salon rose from her platform, and her serpentine form coiled with tension. You speak of things you do not understand, human. My people were violent and destructive before the Council showed us a better way. We are grateful for the wisdom they shared. Daniel met her eyes directly. Are you grateful? Or are you so changed that you cannot remember what you lost? I have studied your history, Ambassador. The Viridians once had poetry and art and philosophy built around the concept of honor and combat. He had ceremonies and traditions that stretched back thousands of years. Now, all of that is gone, and you call it civilization. I call it cultural genocide. The noise in the chamber grew louder, and Chancellor Wormus called for order. Ambassador Carter, you have made your position clear. Now I ask you directly, will humanity accept the Council's terms, or will you force us to take action? Daniel straightened his shoulders, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the entire chamber. No, we will not surrender our fleet. We will not dismantle our defenses. We will not submit to oversight. We will not become another species that forgot who they were. If you want our submission, you will have to take it by force. And I promise you that it will cost more than you ever imagined, Vexther. Stood, and his massive form seemed to fill his section of the chamber. Then you choose extinction. The Council fleet will enter your system and enforce compliance. Your ships will be destroyed. Your cities will be occupied. Your people will learn that defying the Council leads only to suffering. Daniel smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. You are welcome to try, but before you do, let me tell you what you are really facing. You think you have reviewed our military capabilities? You think you know what we can do, but you have only seen what we allowed you to see. For 20 years, we have been preparing for this exact moment. We knew you would eventually try to control us, because that is what the Council does. So we built weapons you cannot imagine, and developed strategies you have never encountered. You want to know what makes humans dangerous? You are about to find out. Chancellor Wormus leaned forward. You make threats you cannot back up, Ambassador. We have 7,000 ships. You have a few hundred. The mathematics alone make your resistance futile. Daniel shook his head slowly. You think war is about numbers? That is because you have been at peace so long. You have forgotten what real combat looks like. War is about will and strategy, and the willingness to do whatever it takes to protect what matters. You have numbers, Chancellor. We have desperation. And a desperate species that knows how to fight is the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. The transmission ended, and Daniel found himself back in the delegation chamber with Sophie standing beside him. She let out a breath she'd been holding. Sir, you just declared war on the entire Galactic Council. Daniel sank into his chair and suddenly looked every one of his 58 years. They declared war on us, Sophie. I just made sure they understand who they are dealing with. Now we go home, and we prepare for what comes next. The Council's response was immediate. Admiral Khazar received orders to advance the fleet and enforce compliance through military action. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Unity, and looked at the tactical displays, showing 7,000 vessels under his command. His career had spanned 40 years, and he had never fired his weapons in combat, because there had been no combat to fight. The Council's mere presence was enough to ensure obedience. Now he was being ordered to attack a species that clearly had no understanding of the power arrayed against them. All units prepare for system jump. We will enter human space in battle formation and demand immediate surrender. If they resist, we will disable their vessels and occupy their orbital stations. Casualties are to be minimized. We are here to enforce peace, not to commit genocide. His tactical officer worked the controls and reported all ships ready. Admiral, the humans have not responded to any of our final communications. They appear to be preparing defensive positions throughout their system, but their numbers are insignificant compared to our forces. Khazar felt a momentary doubt but pushed it aside. They are young and foolish, and they do not understand what they face. We will show them the futility of resistance, and they will surrender. Then this unfortunate incident will be over. On Earth, President Helen Brooks watched the countdown reach 12 hours. The Strategic Command Center was filled with officers and advisors, and every screen showed some aspect of the forces being assembled across the solar system. Admiral Jack Preston stood beside her, and his expression was grim but determined. Madam President, the Council fleet is preparing to jump. They will arrive at the outer system within the hour. Once they cross the heliopause, we will have them exactly where we want them. Helen studied the tactical displays and saw the trap that humanity had laid. The Council expected to arrive and find a desperate defense clustered around Earth. Instead, they would emerge into a killing field that stretched across the entire solar system. How long until all our assets are in final position? Another 6 hours, Admiral Preston replied. By the time they realize what they have jumped into, it will be too late to retreat. Dr. Lisa Hayes appeared on screen from the lunar facility. Madam President, all weapon systems are showing green. Project Silence is ready to activate the moment the Council fleet enters the system. Once we blind them, they will be unable to coordinate, and we can pick them apart at our leisure. Helen nodded slowly. And our stealth ships? Already in position, Captain Nicole Grant reported from the Valiant. We have 37 vessels hidden throughout the outer system. The Council has no idea we are here. When they jump in, we will be behind them and beside them and underneath them. They will not know what hit them until it is too late. Helen took a deep breath and made the final decision that would determine the fate of her species. All units execute battle plan as ordered. We hold fire until they cross the line. But once they commit to the attack, we show them no mercy. We fight until they surrender or retreat, or until there is nothing left to fight with. The orders went out across the solar system, and millions of people prepared for the battle that would decide everything. Parents put children in shelters. Soldiers checked weapons one last time. Scientists ran final diagnostics on systems that had never been tested in real combat. And in the dark spaces between planets 37 stealth, ships went silent and waited for their moment. Ambassador Daniel Carter sat alone and thought about the speech he had given. He wondered if he had been too harsh or too aggressive. Then he remembered the Council's ultimatum and the casual way they had demanded humanity surrender everything that mattered. No, he decided. Some things needed to be said plainly. Some lines needed to be drawn clearly. The Council had been allowed to dominate the galaxy for too long, and someone needed to stand up and say enough. Sophie found him in his quarters. Sir, the fleet is about to jump. We should be in the command center. Daniel stood and straightened his uniform. Then let us go witness history. One way or another, the galaxy is about to change forever. The countdown reached 0. And across the vastness of space, the Council fleet engaged their drives and vanished. They would arrive at humanity's doorstep in minutes. And humanity would be waiting with teeth bared and claws extended, ready to show the galaxy what happened when you threatened a species that had never learned how to quit. The Council fleet appeared at the edge of the solar system near Neptune's orbit in a flash of displaced energy. 7,000 ships materialized in perfect formation, with Admiral Khazar's flagship Eternal Unity at the center, surrounded by layers of protective vessels. The Admiral stood on his bridge and watched the displays come online as his sensors began mapping the human system. It looked empty and defenseless, exactly as he had expected. The humans were probably hiding near their homeworld, hoping that proximity to their civilians would make the Council hesitate to use force. Admiral, all vessels report successful jump. We are in formation and ready to advance. Sensors are scanning for human vessels, but I am not detecting significant forces in our immediate vicinity. Khazar clicked his mandibles in satisfaction. They hide like prey animals. Proceed with the advance. We will move to Earth orbit and demand their surrender. Once they see our numbers, they will understand resistance is pointless. Then everything went wrong at once. The communications officer suddenly shouted that all channels were filled with static. The sensor operator reported that his displays were showing nothing but interference. The weapons officer could not get targeting locks. Within seconds, every system on every ship in the fleet was either malfunctioning or completely dead. Khazar felt the first cold touch of fear as he realized they were blind and deaf and helpless. What is happening? Run diagnostics. Find out what is causing this. His crew worked frantically, but nothing they did restored functionality. The Council fleet hung in space, unable to see or communicate or coordinate and completely unaware that they were already surrounded. On the bridge of the stealth ship Shadow Commander Kyle, Jensen watched through quantum sensors that were unaffected by the jamming. He could see every Council vessel clearly while they stumbled around, unable to detect anything. He opened a channel to his weapons officer, Lieutenant Greg Hamilton, who already had firing solutions locked on 3 enemy cruisers. Fire antimatter torpedoes launched from 37 stealth ships simultaneously and streaked across the void at nearly the speed of light. The Council ships never saw them coming. 3 vessels simply vanished in blinding flashes as matter and antimatter annihilated each other completely. Another 6 followed seconds later, then 12 more. The mighty Council armada was being torn apart by an enemy they could not see or fight or even detect. On the eternal unity, Admiral Khazar felt his ship shudder as nearby vessels exploded. He could see the flashes through the viewports, but his sensors gave him no information about what was causing them. Evasive maneuvers. All ships scatter and go to manual control. We are under attack, but I cannot tell from where. But without communications, he could not coordinate the fleet. Without sensors, they could not know where to go. Individual captains made their own decisions, based on whatever limited information they could gather, and the perfect formation dissolved into chaos. Some ships tried to retreat. Others charged forward. Many simply held position, hoping the attack would pass them by. All of them were wrong. On Mars, Colonel Amy Peterson gave the order her gunners had been waiting for. All batteries open fire. Show them what real artillery can do. 300 railgun platforms hidden beneath the Martian surface fired as one. Tungsten rods 20 tons each accelerated to 20% of light speed and became weapons of devastating power. They crossed millions of kilometers in minutes and struck the Council fleet like the hammer of an angry god. Ships that had withstood centuries of peaceful service crumbled under impacts that released energy equivalent to dozens of nuclear weapons. Hulls split open. Reactors detonated. Entire vessels broke apart under the kinetic assault. Captain Nicole Grant commanded the Valiant as it dropped out of fold space directly behind a group of Council battleships. Her crew had trained for years for this moment, and they executed their attack with perfect precision. Mass drivers fired and antimatter missiles launched, and the human destroyer danced through space faster than the Council ships could track. By the time the enemy realized they were under attack, the Valiant had already destroyed 2 vessels and jumped away to another target. All across the outer system, the battle unfolded in a pattern the Council had never encountered. Human ships appeared and attacked and vanished before any effective response could be organized. Stealth vessels picked off isolated targets. Artillery platforms bombarded from ranges the Council thought impossible. And through it all, the quantum jamming continued, preventing any coordination or unified defense. Admiral Khazar finally managed to get visual contact with several nearby ships using old-fashioned light signals and semaphore flags. He ordered them to form a defensive cluster and concentrate their fire on any target that appeared. For a few minutes, it seemed like this might work. Then the nanite swarms arrived. Dr. Lisa Hayes watched from the lunar facility as 12 clusters of microscopic machines deployed throughout the Council fleet. Each cluster contained 10 billion nanites programmed with one purpose. They spread through space like clouds of gray fog and enveloped council vessels. The nanites were so small that shields could not stop them and armor provided no protection. They simply passed through every barrier and began dismantling ship systems from the inside. On a council cruiser, the captain watched in horror as his engines failed and his weapons powered down, and his life support began flickering. All around him, other systems were dying, but his crew was unharmed. The nanites were surgical in their destruction, targeting only technology and leaving organic life untouched. Within 10 minutes, his ship was nothing more than a floating hulk, and his crew could do nothing but wait to be rescued or captured. The same scene played out across hundreds of vessels. As the nanite swarms did their work, the council fleet was being systematically disabled without the mass casualties that would have made the battle a true slaughter. It was warfare conducted with a precision and restraint that the council had not expected from the species they had labeled as violent primitives. 6 hours into the battle, Admiral Khazar had lost more than 3,000 ships. Some were destroyed. Many more were disabled. The rest were scattered and isolated, unable to coordinate or mount any effective defense. He sat in his command chair and finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. The humans had not been unprepared or foolish. They had been planning this exact scenario for years. Every weapon they used and every tactic they employed was designed specifically to counter the Council's numerical advantage. His tactical officer managed to restore partial functionality to one sensor. Array what Khazar saw made his blood run cold. The human fleet was emerging from hiding throughout the system. Hundreds of vessels appeared from asteroid fields and orbital stations and fold space jumps. They had been there all along, waiting for the Council to commit fully to the attack. Now they moved in to finish what the stealth ships and artillery had started. Captain Ryan Foster commanded the destroyer Titan as it led a squadron against a group of Council battleships that had managed to maintain some cohesion. These ships fought back desperately, and their plasma cannons and missile swarms were deadly. One human frigate took a direct hit and exploded, killing everyone aboard. Another lost engines and went spinning out of control. But the human ships kept coming, using speed and maneuverability to stay ahead of the Council's targeting. Lieutenant Jake Morrison called out targets from his tactical station. Battleship 2 is disabled. Battleship 4 is turning to ram. Ryan ordered an emergency fold space jump, and the Titan vanished just as the massive Council vessels sailed through the space where they had been. Target their engines. End this now. Tungsten penetrators struck. The battleship's drive section and secondary explosions rippled through the hull. The vessel went dead and joined the hundreds of other disabled ships drifting through space. Ryan felt no satisfaction in the victory, only a grim awareness that they were killing people who had probably never wanted this fight, any more than humanity did. On Earth, President Helen Brooks watched the tactical displays and saw the Council fleet disintegrating. Admiral Jack Preston stood beside her, and his expression was carefully neutral. Madam President, we have achieved total tactical superiority. Enemy forces are scattered and unable to mount coordinated resistance. We estimate 70% of their fleet is destroyed or disabled. Helen felt the weight of command pressing down on her. How many casualties on their side? Unknown, but likely in the tens of thousands. Our weapons were designed to minimize deaths, but when you are destroying ships on this scale, some loss of life is inevitable, and on our side, approximately 3,000 dead. Another 5,000 wounded. It could have been much worse. Helen closed her eyes briefly and thought about the families who would receive notifications that their loved ones had died in the first major battle humanity had fought against an alien power. She thought about the Council crews floating in disabled ships, wondering if they would be rescued or executed. She thought about how quickly everything had spiraled into violence despite everyone's best intentions. Send a message to Admiral Khazar on whatever channels still work. Tell him we are offering terms for surrender. His crews will be treated with dignity and respect. Medical assistance will be provided. Disabled ships will be recovered. But the fighting stops now, or we will resume operations, and there will be no survivors. The message went out on every frequency and through every communication method humans could devise. For several minutes, there was no response. Then slowly, hesitantly, Admiral Khazar's voice came through on a crackling audio channel. "This is Admiral Khazar of the Council Fleet. I have authority to negotiate terms of surrender. What guarantees can you provide for my crews?" Admiral Preston responded directly. "Your people will be treated according to the laws of war that humanity has developed over centuries. Medical care for wounded, food and shelter for all. No torture, no executions, no reprisals. You have my word as an officer and as a human being?" There was another long pause. Then Khazar spoke again, and his voice was heavy with defeat. "I accept your terms. All Council vessels are ordered to power down weapons and await instructions. The fleet surrenders." Across the shattered remains of the Armada, weapons went dark and engines shut down. Human vessels moved in to secure the disabled ships and begin rescue operations. Medical teams worked frantically to save Council crew members trapped in damaged vessels. Recovery ships towed hulks to safe orbits. And slowly, carefully, the shooting stopped. Helen Brooks sat down heavily in her chair and let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. They had won. Humanity had faced the greatest military force in the galaxy and emerged victorious. But the cost had been high, and the consequences would echo for generations. She thought about the future and wondered if the galaxy would ever forgive humanity for shattering 10,000 years of enforced peace. Then she straightened her shoulders and prepared to address the Galactic Council. Because winning the battle was only the first step. Now came the harder part of winning the peace. 3 days after the Battle of Sol, the Galactic Council reconvened, but the chamber looked different than it had before. The elevated platforms where council members had literally looked down upon visiting species were now level with the floor. President Helen Brooks had insisted on this change as her first demand, and the council, still reeling from their catastrophic defeat, had agreed immediately. The symbolism was not lost on anyone present. The age of the council, dictating terms from positions of superiority, was over. Helen stood in the center of the chamber with Admiral Jack Preston on her right and Ambassador Daniel Carter on her left. Behind them, holographic displays showed the current status of the captured Council fleet. 4,000 vessels held under human control, with their crews being treated well but firmly prevented from leaving the solar system. The images were a constant reminder of what had happened when the Council tried to force humanity into submission. Chancellor Warmus spoke first, and his elderly voice carried none of the authority it had possessed just days before. "President Brooks, the Council is prepared to hear your terms. We acknowledge that humanity has proven its ability to defend itself, and we are willing to negotiate a lasting peace." Helen took her time before responding. She wanted the Council to feel the weight of this moment and understand that everything had changed. "My terms are straightforward. The Council will formally recognize human sovereignty over our territory and our internal affairs. You will withdraw all observation posts and all compliance monitors and all economic restrictions. You will never again attempt to force humanity into submission through threats or military action. And you will acknowledge in writing that your ultimatum was unjust, and that humanity's response was legitimate self-defense." Ambassador Solange shifted uncomfortably on her platform. "President Brooks, those terms effectively remove all Council authority over human affairs. How can we guarantee that humanity will not become a threat to other species without oversight?" Admiral Preston stepped forward and his voice was hard as steel. "You cannot guarantee anything, Ambassador. That is the point. For 10,000 years, the Council has operated on the assumption that you have the right to control everyone else. You justified it by claiming you were maintaining peace. But what you really maintained was dominance. You made every species forget who they were and called it civilization. While humanity remembers who we are, and we will not forget." Ambassador Vexter spoke next, and his mandibles trembled slightly. "What of our ships and our crews? You hold thousands of personnel hostage. What guarantees do we have that they will be returned safely?" Daniel Carter responded calmly. "They are not hostages. They are prisoners of war being treated according to established conventions. Every crew member has received medical attention. Every wounded soldier has been cared for regardless of species. Every disabled ship that could be repaired has been repaired using our own resources. We are not savages, Ambassador, despite everything you believed about us. Helen pulled up new holographic displays showing weapons that had never been deployed during the battle. These images showed relativistic missiles and quantum bombs and biological agents and technologies that made even the hardened council members gasp in shock. But I want to be absolutely clear about something. What you experienced at Seoul was humanity fighting with restraint. We disabled ships when we could have destroyed them. We used non-lethal weapons when lethal ones would have been more efficient. We targeted systems instead of crew compartments. These displays show what we chose not to use. The chamber fell silent as the council members stared at weapons that violated every treaty and every principle they had established over millennia. Chancellor Wormus finally found his voice. Those weapons are abominations. They violate every standard of civilized warfare. Helen's expression remained calm, but her eyes were cold. They exist because we knew someday we might need them to protect our freedom. And we were right. But notice something, Chancellor. We did not use them. We had the capability to annihilate your entire fleet in the first hour of combat, but we chose not to. We could have killed hundreds of thousands, but instead, we focused on disabling vessels and preserving life. Does that sound like the behavior of mindless savages, Doctor? Lisa Hayes appeared via holographic link from Earth. The Council has spent 10,000 years convincing everyone that humanity's capacity for violence makes us dangerous. But you never stop to consider that our capacity for restraint makes us trustworthy. We know how to fight, and we know when to stop fighting. That combination is what you should have been looking for in a galactic partner, instead of trying to eliminate it, Ambassador. Salon spoke more thoughtfully than before. If we accept your terms, what guarantee do we have that humanity will not use these weapons against other species? You have proven you can defeat us. What stops you from becoming conquerors yourselves? Helen had expected this question. Conquest is not in our interest. We do not want your worlds or your resources. We do not want to rule over other species or impose our values on anyone else. We fought this war for one reason only: to preserve our freedom. But let me be very clear about one thing. If the Council or any member species ever attempts to subjugate another race the way you tried to subjugate us, we will intervene. The galaxy's days of bullying young species into submission are over. The chamber erupted in protests, and angry voices filled the air. Several delegates shouted that humanity had no right to dictate Council policy. Others demanded that the captured fleet be returned immediately without conditions. Chancellor Wormus called for order, but the noise continued for several minutes. Admiral, Preston's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. You tried to dictate our policy. You tried to force us to disarm and submit and become obedient subjects. We said no, and we backed up that refusal with force. Now we are saying that the galaxy needs a new model. One based on cooperation instead of domination. One that respects sovereignty and freedom. If you cannot accept that, then we will keep your fleet and we will make it very clear to every species in the galaxy that there is an alternative to Council membership. The implications were obvious. If humanity kept the captured ships and offered protection to other species, the Council's monopoly on power would shatter. Dozens or hundreds of civilizations might choose independence. The careful control the Council had maintained would collapse, and the galaxy would enter a period of uncertainty and change. Daniel pulled up a new document on the displays. This is what we are offering. A mutual defense treaty open to any species that wants to sign. If you are attacked, we will help defend you. If you are threatened with forced subjugation, we will stand with you. But in return, you agree to respect the sovereignty of others. No more forced pacification. No more demanding that young species surrender their defenses. No more cultural genocide disguised as civilization. Chancellor Wormus studied the treaty language carefully. And if the Council refuses these terms, Helen's voice was quiet but carried absolute certainty. Then we keep your fleet. We establish a defensive perimeter around human space that nothing crosses without permission. And we offer every species in the galaxy the chance to join a new alliance. One based on mutual respect instead of enforced obedience. The choice is yours, Chancellor, but understand that either way, the galaxy will never be the same. The council deliberated for hours while humanity waited. Helen sat in a private room with her advisors and tried not to think about how icily this could still spiral into a larger war. If the council rejected the terms and called for a general mobilization, against humanity the conflict could consume the entire galaxy. But she had meant what she said. Some things were worth any price, and freedom was at the top of that list. Finally, the council returned, and Chancellor Warmus looked older than he had before. The council accepts your terms, President Brooks. We will recognize human sovereignty and withdraw our oversight. We will sign your mutual defense treaty, though it will take time for individual species to decide their participation. And we acknowledge that our ultimatum was unjust, and that humanity's response was legitimate self-defense. Helen felt relief wash over her, but kept her expression neutral. Then we have an agreement. The captured fleet will be returned to your control over the next month as repairs are completed. All prisoners will be repatriated with full medical records and care instructions. And humanity will begin the process of establishing formal diplomatic relations with any council species that wishes to engage with us as equals. Over the following weeks, the captured ships returned home one by one. Every vessel came back fully repaired with crews healthy and well-treated. The council members were astonished by the level of care humanity had provided to their former enemies. Medical teams had worked around the clock to save wounded personnel. Engineers had used human resources to repair alien technology. Even the food provided to prisoners had been carefully selected. To meet the dietary needs of dozens of different species, the Mutual Defense Treaty opened for signatures, and within 2 months, 38 species had signed. Some were small civilizations that had resented council oversight for generations. Others were larger powers that saw an opportunity to chart their own courses without interference. The Viridians were among the first to sign an ambassador. Scyllin spoke at the ceremony with something that might have been hope in her voice. My people once were warriors, and the council helped us forget that part of ourselves. Perhaps working with humanity can help us remember who we were while still being who we are now. On Earth, life slowly returned to normal, though everyone understood that nothing would ever truly be the same. President Helen Brooks visited the memorial sites being constructed for the human personnel who had died in the battle. Each name was carved in stone, and each life was remembered with honor. She stood in front of the long lists of names and felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders once more. Admiral Preston found her there, standing in the afternoon sun. We won, Madam President. We protected our freedom, and we changed the galaxy. Those people did not die in vain. Helen wiped her eyes and looked at the Admiral. I hope history sees it that way, Jack. I hope future generations understand that we did not want this war, but we were willing to fight it. I hope they remember that we showed restraint even in victory, and mercy even to those who would have enslaved us. They will remember, Preston said firmly. History will record that humanity faced extinction and chose freedom. Everything else is just details. 6 months later, Ambassador Daniel Carter stood before the reformed Galactic Assembly and presented humanity's proposal for new conventions governing warfare and diplomacy. The old council structure was gone, replaced by a forum where species met as equals. Daniel spoke to representatives who had once looked down on him from elevated platforms and now sat beside him at the same level. The old model is dead. The council tried to prevent conflict by suppressing the very traits that make species capable of greatness. But those traits are also what make civilizations worth preserving. The new model must embrace diversity even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is dangerous. Because the alternative is stagnation and slow death of everything that makes life worth living. It was not unanimous, and many species still feared humanity's power. But it was a beginning, a chance to build something better than what had come before. Years later, historians would mark the Battle of Sol as the turning point when galactic civilization entered a new era. The age of forced peace had ended, and the age of genuine cooperation had begun. And at the center of it all was humanity. A species that had stumbled into the stars with nothing but determination and stubborn pride. A species that had faced the greatest military power in the galaxy and emerged. Victorious not through brutality but through superior strategy and careful restraint. President Helen Brooks retired and lived quietly near her daughter and grandson. She would sometimes look at the stars and wonder what humanity would do with the freedom they had fought so hard to preserve. But that was a question for future generations. For now, it was enough to know that her grandson would grow up in a galaxy where freedom mattered and where no species would ever again face the choice between submission and death. The peace talks had failed, and humanity's reply had terrified the galaxy. But in the end, the terror had given way to respect, and the galaxy had learned that some species could not be caged. Some spirits could not be broken, and some values were worth fighting for no matter what the cost.